talk about data governance, why it matters, what it does for you, why it's great. So we're going to talk about first, well, data. Because, what are we governing? So the data landscape has changed over the years. Sometimes not as much as people say. Cloud is just someone else's data center. Let's not lie about it. But people are using a lot more different types of data sources nowadays, and that's what makes it a bit complex. We've got SaaS platforms. We're guilty. We're a SaaS platform. Data lakes, where people are conglomerating massive amounts of data in one place. We process a lot more data now, and it grows a bit like Boyle's law. The amount of data that you get increases. Every 18 months, you get twice as much new data. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You're processing data for third parties, all that sort of stuff. So you've got loads of data. You don't know where it is. There's loads of hidden data because people are weird, and people do weird things with data and put it in weird places, and then expect you to mystically, psychically know about it, and you don't. So that's a problem. We've got toxic data. We've got data that your organisation should never have collected in the first place. Your organisation has no reason to collect passport numbers, but mysteriously in your systems you've got passport numbers because your employees are booking holidays and they've saved a document that they like to cut and paste things from, which has got their passport number. And if that gets leaked, oh dear, that's your fault because it's on your system. It's a bit of an issue, isn't it? So we've got that. We've got inferred data where you can join bits of data together and make this wonderful story about someone. And all of this leads to data breaches, potentially, which can be expensive, as we all know. Risks of compliance, breaches of contract, loss of reputation, all that sort of thing. So basically the answer is just don't have data. Just delete it all. Just get rid of it. You don't need it, really. Saves you a lot of trouble. I'm seeing some faces that are not buying into my just delete all your data policy. Okay, all right, fair enough. We'll do something else with it then. So why do we keep data? Because realistically, if we go back, data is a problem, and generally it leads to issues, but it's also great because it enhances what we do. We can sell things via it. We keep track of data about our industry and our businesses and our competitors and our customers, and we can use it for all sorts of clever things, making our customer service more efficient so our customers love us more. But we need to know where all that data is. We can optimize processes by knowing, where are we slowing down? Where can people not get their data when they need it? All that sort of stuff. Doing analytics to work out how to be more effective when we talk to people or reach out and touch people. Okay, I've changed my mind. We're not going to delete all your data. You can keep some of it, but you need to be able to use it. And the problem is that landscape changes a lot. So you've got lots of data, and at first people were just like, hey, collect all the data. And in the 80s and 90s, everyone's like, yeah, get it all. We might have use for it someday. So let's just gather everything. Your inside leg measurement, yeah, we'll probably have a use for that someday. I know we sell computers, but nowadays, obviously, there's a lot more regulation. There's a lot more rules about what we can and cannot do with data. So people have to be a bit more sensible about what they do with data. Customers are also a lot more aware of their data and what they can and cannot do with it as well. They can tell you to change it, update it, get rid of it, give it all to them. Not obviously all of it, but their bits. So customers are a lot more aware. And of course, when we say customers, are we talking about GDPR rules? Are we talking about CCPA rules? Are we talking about POPI or PAPI? Are we talking about KVKK from Turkey? What do you have to do when any customer from anywhere in the world comes up and talks to you about it? Lots of different things you might have to do. So the idea is we're scared of data because data leads to breaches and getting fined, but we love data because data has value. And this is where a lot of organisations err on one side or the other. And really the only way to move forward successfully is by understanding both sides of this part. You need to be compliant, but if you're compliant to the point where you can't actually access and use that data, your compliance kills you. Obviously, if you're only applying business value, you're going to leak data like a sieve, and the fines will kill you. So there's a balancing act we need to get to. And to get there, we need to know and govern our data. So for most organisations, they live in a passive data model. Passive data governance. This is equivalent of you coming home, picking up your mail from behind the door and going, oh, bank statement. And you run upstairs and you put it in that nice fireproof box where all your bank statements live and you lock it up like a good person. You've done the right thing with your data. And that's what organisations do. Oh, I've taken data, I go and put it in the right place, it's locked up, it's encrypted, blah, blah, blah. And then one day you come home and you pick up that letter and you go, oh, and then the child cries or your phone rings or the cat throws up in your shoes, which is what it does to me. And that really throws you off doing what you're doing with that letter. You're like, oh, I'll deal with that in a moment. They're evil. Cats are evil and they glare at you when they do it and they know they're doing it as well. And so you leave that letter on the edge of the stairs. You forget about it. So suddenly I've got really vital data for me on my stairs and not in my fireproof box upstairs. This is not good. Companies do the same. Well, employees of companies do the same. So people get a bit lazy, a bit complacent. They need to do their job faster because their manager's shouting at them and telling them to do their job faster. And so they start shortcutting things because they're expected to do more and more and more and more with less time. So they're going to put data where it's convenient for them, and that's not always in that nice fireproof box upstairs. So what you want is active data governance. Active data governance is where you don't just assume that data's in the right place, where you've got to have checks and bounces, and you're going to look at that data and go, okay, is everything in the right place? Have I got it where it's supposed to be? Have I found data where it's not supposed to be that I need to move to where it is? That's what we're going to look at. So to do that, you need information. So this is data discovery. This is when your other half comes home and finds the letters on the stairs and nicely moves them up to that fireproof box for you because they've realised you've left the bank statement on the stairs. For corporates, obviously, for enterprises, this is data discovery. This is a tool that goes around your environment and checks your letters for you and says, that's not supposed to be there, that's supposed to be somewhere else. It finds that data. So this is to give you an awareness of, am I putting data in the wrong place? And also, what data do I have? Because data you don't know is data you cannot use. It's just dark data, it's useless. So investigating your unstructured, semi-structured, your structured data, you've got relevant data. You know, commercial data because you make decisions about that. Customer data because that's sensitive. Personal data because that's even more sensitive. We need to know where all those live. And then we need to know why that matters. So I found a piece of data. It's someone's credit card number. Why does that matter to me? And again, we mesh that between both the compliance reason why that matters to me and the data reason why that matters to me. So I'm under, various regulations. That's data which I've got to protect because if that got leaked or I'm putting a risk on a person, if they suffer for that risk, they can sue me or go to the Data Protection Authority and jump up and down on me until I'm flat. We don't like that. But we also need that data because having that data is maybe part of business or contract where we can automate those payments. Like Netflix needs your credit card details so they can bill you every month or some sort of payment details. Fair play to them. That's part of their business model. They need that data. So for them, that's their recurring revenue, but they need to know the compliance side of it as well. So, and as we spoke about earlier, it gets more complicated because there's hundreds of compliance. And the data that you hold, you need to understand where it came from. Is this a European citizen? Might be in place. Not always, but might be in place. Is it an American, specifically someone from California? Is it someone with dual nationality? Because then they might be subject to two different rules. So you need to understand that this is not as simple as it once was. When just GDPR was in the field, that's not too bad. But now you have to have the intelligence to be able to sift this data and actually work out how you're going to do stuff. And one of the other big problems is silos. Teams can sometimes regard themselves as more important than other teams or separate from other teams. There is only one team in your organisation that should be separate from all other teams. Who knows what that is? Someone shout out any answers if you've got any. The team in your organisation that should really be independent. Anyone? Any guesses? Auditing. Your auditing team is the only team that should be completely independent because they should not be able to be swayed by anybody else. So auditing teams should be independent. That's fair. All the other teams work together. Spoke to a customer last week who came out with the immortal words as a DPO. Some other team wanted to scan their data to work out, and the DPO went, well, you better not come anywhere near my data. A, that's blinding the scanning to a lot of data, and B, your data? It's not your data, it's the company's data. This is where siloing these things is really daft, because when you're building tools, when you're doing things, when you're doing governance, it's about the company's data and what the company gets out of it. So putting your DPO hat or your security hat or your data steward hat on saying it's my data, you can't touch it, doesn't work anymore. It duplicates the process, it duplicates expense. They might have to have multiple tools to do it. You might have the same database holding 3 different copies of the same data because they pull it in different ways. So nowadays, the idea of this is that you should have one source of that data. If you've got a blob of data, you should only hold it in one place. One should draw from it. So you know it's of good quality, you know it's relevant, you know it's the latest data, you know it's what you need. And if everybody pulls from that one source, then everyone's working off the same data, so business decisions will be correct, as opposed to what that department wants. So it streamlines it. It makes it more efficient. It makes it a lot cheaper because you're not storing data, because storing data costs. So you need to break out of those silos. So here we're going to go through a quick example of a process that actually benefits from not having siloed data. So part of the business wants to have a new department granted access to a brick of data. So they're going to make sure this is secure by putting in awareness training courses, making sure people attest to a data usage policy. Then the employees do that, they're granted access to the data and anyone else that comes in here. So there's actually a few different departments that actually going to be needed in this. We've got the business owner of that data has to make a decision about whether they're going to allow them to have that data. The security team need to make decisions about should they be given that data and how I'm going to give them that data safely. Then your training people, your HR and training staff need to make sure they're trained appropriately with input from HR, with IT and security and all that sort of good stuff, and the department whose data it is. They need to make training courses. Someone in auditing needs to make sure that people have actually signed that policy. And then you need to check that they're doing it, and it's always done for new people. So if you're siloing this data, every department have to have their own vision of this. The idea is to actually, by having one vision, this decision's made from one source of data. Everyone understands what the data you're trying to access means to you, why it matters, what context it's in, so they can make that decision efficiently and intelligently. So, the shameless sales pitch part of the day. How can we, as OneTrust, help you with this? And we can. So, one of those things is to actually scan and enrich that data. Actually getting to what that data is. And I mean content level inspection. Scanning metadata isn't good enough anymore, because lots of unstructured data doesn't give you any viable metadata. It'll tell you when it was last accessed, and if someone's already tagged it, but if they haven't tagged it, what are you going to get out of it? Also, structured data sources like databases, I'll say shameless sales pitch and he leaves, which fair play, realistically speaking. Structured data sources. The column might say credit cards, but if you scan it, it might not all be credit cards. Someone may have put in bad data, low quality data, just rubbish data. So we need to be able to actually scan that data and mark it for why it matters. So to do that, you're going to turn what you found into metadata and actually make sense of it. So a metadata catalog is going to detail all of your assets. So where are you holding data? Is that on a SaaS platform someone else's runs? Is it your own servers? Is it in a database? All that sort of good stuff. We need to know where it belongs. But you need to tie that in with business processes. Siloed assets are not very helpful. So I need to know if I'm doing HR recruitment, actually, okay, we use Brass Ring to grab our data, and we use Facebook to advertise it. We grab some feedback from there, and then we put it into Salesforce, and we attach it into this database, and then this team pulls it from there, and that's a process. And by understanding that process, by mapping those processes, you suddenly get context of what that data's doing. So I have data in this asset, and as part of that, I give some of it to Facebook. Okay? Facebook's an American company. TREMS 2 means I can't automatically give that data to Facebook. Have we got a decision about that? Is there an adequacy decision? No, there ain't at the moment. Is there decisions about, have they got binding corporate rules of standard contractual clauses? What have they done to actually prove to me that they're allowed to handle that data? And that only comes by understanding those business processes, by mapping that out. How am I doing for time? I'm doing fine for time, that's good. I normally rabbit on for ages. So you need to understand that processes. You also need to understand your vendors, because obviously we all know this on DG, but I'm not going to labour the point. If I give you data to process, you especially, you look suspect to me. But if I give you data to process and you leak it, I'm just as responsible as that's for you are. I'm only joking, you probably wouldn't leak my data, you look fine. But that's an important thing to understand, is that understanding your vendors, what they give to you, what you give to them, is just as important about knowing your own assets. You must be able to monitor, manage those vendors, because they're a massive risk. And then what actually is that data by element? So what is it? What am I holding? Am I holding credit cards and CVVs and dates of birth and what's all that bits of data I hold? And then by context, how much of it can I put together to actually really identify people or to really damage people if that got breached? Because that's individual pieces of data might not be too bad. You bring them together, they become a lot more dangerous. So now we're going to do something about that to actually bring the business into line. One of the, everyone familiar with business glossaries? Yeah, they're really useful. So business glossaries are the idea of bringing all of your bits of your company together to speak the same language. If I was to ask all of you here to define a customer account ID number, you'd all probably have different versions of it. You might even not have them. But the customer account ID numbers, if you do have them, will all be different because you'll refer to your customers in different ways. And that's fine. That's good. If I ask different organisations, parts of my own company, what my customer account ID number is, and they all come back with different answers, I've got a huge problem. Because now if I search for them, I don't know what I'm finding. If I'm, defining them, which one's right, which one's wrong, how are we going to use those? So a business glossary is a really important tool for defining those and saying, if you want to use customer account number, this is what it looks like, this is how you should use it, this is where it may live, and this is what it means, this is why it matters. And you assign that to business units so that you know who manages that data as well. Cool. And once you've got that, once you've got it, you know where it lives, you know when you use it, you know who you give it to, you know that you've defined it, then you know what applies to it. You know what regulations really matter to it. What policies you then need to put into place to deal with that. And one of our bits of tool, which I'll talk about in just a second, actually helps you with that by giving you legal advice and guidance on that. Because, to be fair, if you make widgets for beer bottles, for beer cans, widgets to make them extra foamy, do you really want to, as a widget making company, GDPR? Probably not. I'm an information security professional and I don't want to study GDPR because it's really boring. So they don't want to. So why not get someone who does study that sort of thing to actually tell you about it? Thank you very much. So, now we can actually start doing things like incident management. So if an incident occurs and it hits a particular data store, I'm not saying it'll be great, but I am saying, because I know what data lives in there, I know what assets are affected, I know what processes it goes through, I know which vendors hold that data, and I know what regulations and policies, I can react to it in seconds. As opposed to then scrabbling around and going, oh my God, database has been touched, what was in there? I'm there. Instant ability to actually react to it and decide what I need to do. It may need to report that to the ICO, you need to report a breach and that, but at least you know. At least you're not scrabbling around in the darkness. And of course, before an incident occurs, we can actually manage the risk. We know that database holds this sensitive information. So what controls are we putting there? What have we done to minimize that risk? Can we pseudo-nominize that data? He said it right first time. Normally takes me a few swings at pseudo-nominizing. But we can minimize that risk by knowing our data, by knowing our assets, knowing our processes. If we've got a process where we're giving data out to a third-party vendor, can we get rid of any of it? Can we anonymize it, pseudo-anonymize it, delete any of it before we hand it over? Because let's get that risk down before we interact with it. We can search for our data using elastic search engines. So instead of being blind to it, I can go, where's all my PCI data? I've now suddenly got a list of all my PCI data. Am I holding PCI data on that database? Yes. Am I supposed to? Do I need to do something about that? Our AI is very clever and will give you recommendations about, actually, I've noticed you're holding this type of data and you said you shouldn't be, because when you spoke to me you said you work in this vertical. There's nothing about you holding that type of passport data. Why are you holding it? So you can get sort of intelligence in there to actually help double check what you're doing. And obviously you can report on it. And DSARs, everyone knows about DSARs. DSARs are boring at the minute, so I'll skip them. So, we're going to go into the peacock, as we like to call it, because it's lovely and colourful. So at the core of what we're talking about, from us, dear old OneTrust, is we've got data discovery and data guidance. Data discovery is, well, it's data discovery. I don't need to belabor the point. It goes and discovers your data. So it goes and finds all that data. As we talked about earlier, getting to know your data, it means knowing where it is. Data guidance is our team of lots and lots of security professionals and legal researchers and data engineers and data scientists that go around the world and hire in teams from around the world to understand all of these regulations. So when China released a regulation, we already had rules for it because we'd already spoken to them, we'd already got all that data. The rules were in the platform already. So this keeps on touch of that, so your widget manufacturing doesn't need to be interrupted by filthy things like rules. Privacy is very boring, it's about cookies. Everyone has cookie management software, that's what the privacy tool's about. But our governance is what we're primarily talking about today. So that's our data lineage and our data catalog, that's making your data searchable, classifiable, giving it context, giving it relevance, actually mean it matters. That's more cookie stuff. That's not. That's about gathering the idea of what permission you've got to do with people. So actually, that's actually quite vital. I take it back. I apologise, preference choice. So this is how you gather user consent. So am I allowed to hold your data? Well, I can actually get you to attest and sign for that. Am I allowed to email you? Am I allowed to share that data with third parties? That can all be automated and managed by preference choice, giving them opt-in and opt-out stations and giving them electronic signatures so you can actually prove at any time. So that's actually reasonably important. GRC, so that analyses risk. So we've found your data. We found your data is not where it's supposed to be. Oh dear, that's a problem. So now we're automatically generating risk off of that. We found data in the wrong place. Let's make a risk, let's assign it to someone who now needs to go and fix that risk. You, Fred Blogs, go and actually do something about this, not just an email that tells you it happened. You're responsible now to actually go and fix that problem, either remediate that data, encrypt it, delete it, whatever, and give me evidence. Ethics. Increasingly important after the whole SOX thing. Now companies have to have a whistleblowing portal. Everyone aware of that? You actually have to have a whistleblowing portal nowadays, so where people can report stuff? Yeah, you do. Even small companies have to. Not many people realise that. So we can actually provide that for you, an anonymised, auditable whistleblowing portal. So if someone finds something that they want you to deal with, they can actually bring this to you. You can then actually workflow it, decide whether it's realistic, if there's something you want to do about it, and actually evidence that at least you'll know about it and you've considered it, even if you don't do it. Because that's important. Because if they then go to the press or to various other authorities and say, well, I told them that, they were harming badgers in the making of their makeup. I don't know where that example came from. I can only apologise. It's quite weird. But protect the badgers. But then you can actually at least prove that you were aware of it and you considered it and you did something about it. Even if it's just said, we're not fixing it. Because we don't think it's that important. Thank you. Analysis of vendors. I spoke about it earlier. If I pass data on to a vendor, they're just as responsible for it and I'm just as responsible for what they do with it. So wouldn't I really like to know about my vendors? Wouldn't I like to know what their cyber risk score is? I want to know if they're actually ISO 27001 compliant or not at this time. Has it elapsed? Have they just had a massive financial loss or financial hit against them that makes them more vulnerable? Vendorpedia will tell you all of these things, so you can actually get a baseline level of trust about your vendor before you start doing business with them, because that's really important. And ESG, environmental services. This is massive nowadays. What's your carbon footprint? How are people flying around? How are people transporting? What are you doing to minimise that? What's your carbon footprint of your vendors? Because if you pay a vendor for a service, you are responsible. So if you're telling Microsoft to host your data, they've got a data center, they're powering that up. Most people, most investors will actually say you are just as responsible for that carbon footprint of those servers as they are, because you're paying them to do it. They wouldn't do it without you. So it's inconsequential. And investors love this. They absolutely love this type of stuff. Investors are now making massive money decisions about investing in companies that have a good ecological output because it's for good copy. Let's not pretend they're doing it because they're saints and they really want to save the world, but it means they get a lot less egg on their face. And one or two of them actually are saints. To be fair, some investors are actually nice guys. But for most of them, it's good copy. It makes them look fantastic. So knowing your environmental impact, knowing how you can minimize it, and knowing how you can leverage that in your marketing nowadays is actually really massive. It's our biggest growing thing at the minute, by far. We thought we sort of brought it on as a bit of a joke. Sort of, people are interested in carbon footprint, let's bring it on, it might be interesting. It's gone mad. It's brilliant. Brilliant little bit of product. So, that's me rabbiting on at you for far too long. I can only apologise. It wasn't that exciting, but that's probably because I've read it before. Any questions? Ask me. If not, you've got a very long walk to literally there to come and see our stand. We're next door, so feel free to come and say hello to us there as well. Thank you very much for your time. You made it through the last session of the day very well. I'm very impressed with you. There was no snoring. Very good.